5 minutes to 9.
Oh, you're sitting on it. Yeah.
This is something that I've written recently, a new parser for markup languages. Yeah, another one, I know. I wanted, once upon a time, to scrape some web pages, hack the result around in Excel. So, how are you going to do it? Well, Excel's got a DOM built into it, which is wonderful. Only problem with it is if you put in anything that is malformed and ask it to parse, it returns undef. No clue as to what the problem is, just undef, or VBA equivalent to undef. And that isn't malformed as you or I would define it. That is malformed as Bill Gates defined it. And Bill Gates' definition of malformed includes, among other things, a dog type. That is malformed. So before you can use the DOM, you've got to go through your markup language and remove anything that, according to Bill Gates' rules, is a problem. Or to put it slightly differently, before you can use the parser, you have to have parsed it. So I wrote my own. What I'm trying to do now is write some Perl, which will generate some HTML. And I'd like to do that using TDD. Now the problem with that is that there's every chance that the HTML or XML or anything is going to be malformed as you write it. That's what I want to find out. And as you write new stuff, you break your previously working test because it's no longer what the thing was expecting. What's already available? Well, of course, you start off by searching. The first thing I came up with was HTML parser. Now, any of you who've heard me before know that I rant about documentation. This is the synopsis for HTML parser. And the docs don't cover anything that's not in the synopsis. And you will notice there's a lot of stuff here about how to put stuff in, a lot of stuff about how to parse it, and absolutely nothing about what to do with it once it's parsed, how to get anything out. There's not a clue. I'm sure it's a wonderful tool and that you can do wonderful things with it. I can't. Next stop was HTML tree builder, which at least said do whatever you need to do with the syntax tree. So you try going further into the tree builder docs and you find out it uses HTML element, which has a traverse method. So you go to the traverse method and it says don't use it. There's documentation on why you shouldn't use it in another file. So you go to the other file, yak shaving anyone? And that gives you this. Isn't that nice and clear? No, it isn't. I've cut out what it's supposed to do, but I can't see that it does what it says it's supposed to do. I can't see why anyone would want to do what it says it's supposed to do, and I certainly can't hack that into the sort of test that I want to write, which is table 2, row 3, column 4, what I put into template toolkit to put into Dancer to send to the user, or what I thought I did. So, next thing you do when you try to find out what's available is you ask Perl monks, and I did, and there were 1 or 2 dead ends, but they put me onto XML XPath, and I should have got this working. The first line of my output there from test file you can see works fine. The second one's a problem, and because the second one's a problem, I didn't see the problem that I'd created that's in the third and fourth line. Now that second line, it's reporting too many lines in a table. I know there are 4 lines in that table, it thinks there are 8. I've sent off a bug report rather, but that's got me to mixed metaphors, flailing at demons and barking up the wrong tree. So I couldn't get XML XPath working, although nowadays I would be able to. Guess what I did next? What I've written is far simpler. It takes strings and it returns strings, an integer in one case. It's written in move, object-orientated, and there's a parser object. You can define what the tag looks like. You've got a left-hand character, a right-hand character, and the thing that defines what posts it. There's also an array of what I've called verbatim tags, and these are things that you may not want to parse. It's user-definable, so if you don't want to use this list, you can make your own. If you want to have separate objects, different lists in, go ahead. The command I use most frequently is I've called within. You send it some markup language, tell it what tag you're interested in, and it will tell you what's between the opening and closing tag. Returns a string. The index is optional, and we'll come on to that later because I found that rather fun. If you've got anything that's malformed, in whole or in part, it will close open tags that aren't closed implicitly at the end of your markup language. It builds a stack of the tags, so it will apply your closing tags to the last one that was opened and hasn't been closed first. And anything that's not your target tag, it's just treated as text. So if not interested in anything, you haven't told it to be interested in. So if you get some tag soup like that and ask what's within the Z tag, you'll get ASDF. That first Z tag is within pre-tags, which are in the verbatim tag set. This might be someone explaining what a Z tag is and then using it. So within the pre-tags on the default model, it's ignored. If you use your own model and said, don't tell me what's within the, don't consider the verbatim tags, and you ask what's within the first Z tag, you get everything from XCF to the end. Because the Z tag is closed implicitly at the end, and you've got two opening and one closing. If you weren't using verbatim tags and you said what's within the second Z tag, you'd get ASDF. But because I liked XPath, I wrote a wrapper around within that I called WPath. Anything that is a valid XPath is a valid WPath. The reverse is not true because WPath will take all sorts of things. So in this example here, I've got a lot of HTML and I'm saying, is 17 what I've put in that table? And that long XPath will work, but so will that very short path, starting at tbody. In fact, if you know that there are no TRs in the table header, you could even leave out the tbody. There are in the example I've given. You can get really nasty with this. You can leave out that right square bracket throughout, because all it does is a split on the left square bracket. Then it strips out any non-digit characters. Told you it was liberal. And I also told you that index was fun. Because I wanted to retain XPath compatibility, if it's greater than 0, it's like XPath. 1 is the first, 2 is the second, and so on. But if it's less than 1, it works like Perl. So if you give it a negative number, if you give it -1, it'll give you the last tag in the set. So I finally found a use case for saying that 0 is equal to 1, and I think that's fun. Undefined 0-length strings and the like also work the same. Tag val, I haven't used yet, but I can see myself doing so. Within tells you what's between an opening tag and the closing tag. Tag val tells you what's inside the tag itself. So if you say within that ML, you'll get back click. But if you say tag val, you'll get href.example.com. Inner text is one I find myself using all the time when people change their websites. It will go through looking for something that is not a tag, and by calling within recursively, and then it will just give you everything everything up to the first closed tag it finds. So the fact that these are all X's doesn't matter. Inner text will just throw out ASDF regardless, provided the tags are matched. Doesn't care how deep you go. Again, it's a call to within. Tag count is the one that gives you digits back. So with that ML, I've got 4 div tags, I've got no X tags. loop, you can loop. That is what I've done. Now we come on to what I'd like you to do. I doubt if there's anyone here who's parsed less XML and HTML than I have. So do tell me where I've gone wrong. Ignore Tom's thing about be kind, be brutal. I'm thinking about releasing this to CPAN, which is something I've never done before. Is this appropriate? How do you do it? Because all the docs I've found talk about how to do it in Linux, and as you probably gathered, I work on Windows, and how to do it with things like H2XS, which starts by creating the directory tree that you are going to need. Well, I've done it without that, so it's a bit of a problem. If it's going on to CPAN, what should I call it? Somebody suggested XML liberal. I don't know what's a good name. Finally, you've all got copies of the pod. And I said earlier that I was brutal about other people's documentation, and I said ignore Tom's comments about being brutal. Be even more brutal about the pod, because I don't believe anyone does a good job of documenting their own code. I don't think it's possible. If you say, well, it's adequate, I suppose that's about the highest level of praise that I'm hoping for on the docs. Thank you.
Any questions? Okay, thanks, John. So we've got kind of a few, I won't keep you long, a few rounding up words. First of all, thank you to all 6 of the speakers. I thought you had a good range of